our goal as a group, what I'd like to do is to walk out of here and have a little exercise in building a neighborhood philosophy statement together. And that sounds kind of big and heady, but I think we can simplify it and make it approachable and understandable and hopefully enjoyable as well. So by applying intentional language, this statement will help us to understand how to give us a little framework to think and act through, to help us to see obstacles that we tend to put in front of ourselves that prevent us from really having the kind of neighborhood that we want, and keep us from growing and making our neighborhood better. So one more thing before I start, I want to quickly make clear some assumptions that I'm making about y'all as an audience before I start, so you're not halfway through here wondering what assumptions that I've made about you. The first is, if you're here, that you live or work in my neighborhood in Oak Cliff. The second assumption that I'm making is, if you're here, you most likely work for yourself or for a small business, or you work from home. And the third assumption is based off of those first two. If those first two are true, it's probably an intentional choice for you. It's not coincidental or accidental. And because it is an intentional choice, my assumption that I'm making is, like me, you guys want to do better. You want to be better. The fourth assumption that I'm making is that, like me, you guys live in a world that is chaotic at times, that is full of distractions and things that tend to take away from our attention and our resources, and things that essentially will hinder our growth. So that we live in a world where things are sort of working against us to some extent as we try to grow as humans. So that's my fourth assumption. Okay. Now that I've confessed my assumptions to you, let me get some water. I want to challenge us to embrace our ability to choose who we are and what we want our neighborhood to become. Okay, I think I heard somebody talking about Mr. Rogers before I started. I'm going to talk about Mr. Rogers, yeah. Who remembers Mr. Rogers besides Ryan? Okay. Can anybody tell me the questions that he asked at the beginning of his show? There's three. They're very related, similar questions, but there's three questions. Anybody remember?
Will you be my neighbor?
It's very close. Yeah. Would you be mine? Could you be mine? Please, won't you be my neighbor? Okay, those are the three questions he asked. They all kind of sound very similar, but they're different questions, right? One, the first, is a question of will. It's a question of choice. Will you be my neighbor? The second is a question of ability. Can you be my neighbor? It's a challenge. And the third question is a pleading, right? A pleading to make that choice, a pleading to rise to that challenge. So you have to choose to be a neighbor in Mr. Rogers' neighborhood, right? Showing up is not enough. And showing up is not enough because a neighbor is, and embracing neighborliness is what makes a neighborhood what it is. It's not the infrastructure. I think often we tend to think about a neighborhood, we think about infrastructure. Think about the houses, the lampposts, the sidewalks, the trees, the streets, the schools, the parks. Those things don't constitute a neighborhood. The character and the soul of a neighborhood is created by the thoughts and the actions of its neighbors. That is a neighborhood. And Mr. Rogers knew this. So he posed to us at the beginning of his show a choice to be a neighbor. He gave us a map of his neighborhood, and he offered for us to experience and explore his neighborhood if we made that choice. But he put it to us. He didn't make assumptions. He simply asked. And he gave us the power and the will to make that choice or to not. So he understood, while not overshooting our developing minds, that philosophy and what we believe is important to a neighborhood. And he was able to take this kind of heady concept and communicate it in a really particular way to young children. So what he challenged us to do, if we made that choice, was to take on the natural responsibility that comes with freedom, as we have the freedom to choose to be in his neighborhood. He challenged us with that. And he challenged us to, through this, build meaning in our neighborhood together. And understanding meaning is really central to philosophy. And the primary problem for us as normal folk, I'm assuming that we don't have any esteemed philosophers in here. I apologize if I do. But for us as normal folks is that philosophy seems impractical. It seems too esoteric, too elitist. I liken it to a hot air balloon. It looks nice, not really useful for much, and the more I watch it, the further away it gets and the higher it goes. And in our lives, with being shackled by the toils and distractions of everything that we experience on a day-to-day basis, what we tend to settle for is something that's really more like an electric can opener, right? It's something that is convenient, takes up too much space, and is solving a problem that we didn't even realize we had because we saw an advertisement for it. And what philosophy is a map. It's not, it shouldn't be esoteric. It should not be a hot air balloon. It is a map for us. It is a guide. It's not a ride. It's not another distraction or another device. But it guides our choices to where we should go. And it helps guide us out when we've taken a wrong turn. So, before I begin to confess to you to you guys today some of my own story of Oak Cliff Coffee and my journey of trying to build a neighborhood business philosophy, I want to give a definition. And if you want, you have these handouts in front of you. You can write this down. It's kind of long, so I'm going to read it a couple times so it soaks in a little bit. And I'm not shooting over everybody's head here, but philosophy is a map that guides us to meaning and purpose by illustrating both our freedom and our responsibility to choose, think, and act in accordance with what we believe, and there's a little more, and to help identify what hinders us towards that goal. Again, I'm going to read that one more time. I'll go a little more slowly this time. Philosophy is a map that guides us to meaning and purpose by illustrating both our freedom and our responsibility to choose, think, and act in accordance with what we believe, and to help identify what hinders us toward that goal. So up until my late 20s, I was on a quest for my own personal GDP. I was looking to better myself with the way that the world told me to do it, through mass production and mass consumption and sort of fitting into that system. You know, the choice was, or the path was to go to college, get a couple of business degrees, move to Dallas, get a corporate job that pays well, that has good benefits, plenty of vacation days. And I never thought to ask, why does that corporate job have to pay so well? Why do they need to give you so many vacation days? Why do they spend so much money on college recruitment those questions like that never occurred to me, and I kept sort of moving through the system. But these answers would later in my life become clearer to me, and I would begin to see the trade-off that I was making in that down that path. And I never asked myself the question or thought about what kind of neighbor do I want to be, or what kind of neighborhood do I want to live in. Those weren't questions that I was ever asking myself. So I was bought into the world's propaganda that my meaning would come through consumption, through materialism. That if I were to just fulfill my calling as a great consumer, that I would find my happiness, I would find my harmony in life. So from consumer indexes to our cell phones, our value as a society and as individuals in that society is defined by how much we consume. In fact, our health as a nation is measured by how much we're able to consume. Now, this is a bit of a crazy notion when you think about applying this concept to something else. If you think about applying this to people, think about the person, don't say this out loud, this isn't part of the exercise, but think about a person you know who eats the most, or a person who spends the most, shops the most, or is on social media the most, or playing video games the most. And how would you rate the physical and mental health of that person? Right? It's a crazy notion to think that our capacity to consume is a measurement of health for our nation. And this measurement, it changes the definition of what an economy is for us. And so it changes our goal. And our leaders, our politicians, our economists, our teachers even, push this idea on us throughout our lives with no questions asked. But what I found is this ran in opposition to my faith, and it ran in opposition to my mind. And so I began to see that my daily consumptive behavior was contradictory to what I believed. And so I sought to understand my contradictions more. And I still am seeking to understand my contradictions more because I'm full of them. And I hoped that my life meant more than to simply be a consumer. And so through the eyes of men like Blaise Pascal and G.K. Chesterton and Wendell Berry, these hero philosophers of mine, I began to see more clearly and to give words to my discontent. And I saw that this idea of creating was literally woven into my DNA. That I had a latent desire to make something that contributed to someone. It wasn't, I don't think this is unique to me, I think this is a human thing. To make something that contributes to someone who has a face, someone whose name I know, someone who perhaps is my neighbor. And this is incongruent with the reality that is pushed on us at every corner. That everything is driving us to consume more, right? And we walk through our day, we see it everywhere. And consumption is big, and it's anonymous, it's corporate, and it's global. But creating, this idea of creating, it's intentional, and it's local, it's personal, and it's accomplished in small increments. So through this internal wrestling and trying to understand myself more and understand my world more, I began to see these sort of two opposing forces, and I started writing about this years ago, just kind of for my own personal benefit. But this two internal forces, this good and evil my light and dark, this creating and consuming idea that was constantly in front of me and constantly defining my struggles. And so I worked to build a language around this idea. And this language became not just a language for me, but it became a language for my family. It became a language for my business, for Oak Cliff Coffee, for our employees, and hopefully for our customers. And the words that we sort of have whittled it down to today after a lot of time is do not simply consume, create. That is a philosophic statement for us. That's not a slogan for us. We're not going to put that to a jingle. It wouldn't sound very good in a jingle. But it is a statement for us that it is a filter. And so when I can look back over the last 14 years of Oak Cliff Coffee, and I can see how we have used that idea to help guide us in making big decisions and small decisions for our business. It's a part of why we buy direct from coffee producers around the world and why we visit them regularly. It's a part of why we make choices to forego revenue opportunities with clients and in our cafe when there's very easy ways where we could make more money if we chose to. It's why we chose to make more products in our neighborhood rather than expand our footprint across the U.S., right? This idea of what is truly creating versus what is just us trying to consume more. And that is even for someone who's thought about this for a really long time, that decision, that choice is confronting me every day, right? It's not a point where I get to where all of a sudden I know how to just do that. It's a constant practice and struggle to think about those things and that criteria, and having that framework is really helpful for us making those decisions. And even within my family, that's a really helpful framework for decisions that we've made. So by identifying what I could and should be and how the world was working against those goals and how much I was wrapped up in consumption, I began to use this tool as a guide. And the power of philosophic language became really practical and useful to me. So the notion is both, it's lofty and it's also simple. My goal for us today is as a group to start our journey for our neighborhood by making the first little corner of a philosophic map. And this is what this exercise is in front of you and on the board here. And what I hope that you walk away with, one, is that we come away with something useful as a group. And it's going to be a challenge of the group this big to hone that in, but I think we can do it. And two, to come away with a tool that you can actually use on your own, and a way to think through how to begin to sort of see challenges that hinder you, and to create a language around that to help guide you in your journey. So we are going to begin our neighborhood philosophy map here, and I'm going to ask my daughter to come up and write for me so I'm not doing too many things at once. This is Alice. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I would like you to grab one person, either to your left or your right. If you came in a group of three, I'd like a third person to grab the odd man out. I spent 40 years being the odd man out, so I'm going to stand up for him today. So groups of two, if you can't find another two, then hop in and make your group of three, that's fine. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask some questions. I'm going to give you about 2 minutes to discuss it in your group. And then write it down if you want to write it down. And we're going to go through these, they're numbered here, and how we're going to move through it. And then after those 2 minutes, we're going to kind of discuss it as a group. We're going to write some things on the board and try to hone in some ideas here. And we're going to look for are repetitive ideas, right? Something that a lot of people are saying, so we can create a statement that has a broader application for us. And I might ask some follow-up questions so I can dig a little deeper and get a little better understanding as we write things on the board. Okay, so the first question, and some of these have like number one has two questions. It's really the same question worded differently, so I was trying to sort of broaden my audience, so just answer the one that makes the most sense to you, but they're really getting at the same idea. So what things, number one, what things have increased the value of the neighborhood to you? And if you're not in this neighborhood, if you don't match my assumptions, you can write about your own neighborhood. What is significant to you about the place that you live? So thinking tangibly, what are significant things about your neighborhood, and what has increased when you think about why you chose that neighborhood or what you would like to see more in that neighborhood? What are things that have increased the value of the neighborhood to you? Okay, go ahead. First, what's important to you about your neighborhood, or what would you, yes.
So we had a couple.
Okay,
Intentional businesses.
intentional businesses, okay. And when you say that about your neighborhood, you mean that they're in proximity to where you live, that there's a closeness to that, right?
I think a lot of the businesses in our community, like the owners, they love their craft. So you can feel a difference and people want to support the businesses and visit them and be a part of them. I think that's a good thing.
Okay, so just to mirror what you said a little bit, intentional businesses and that intentionality, you're referencing specifically like the craft or like how well they make or do what they do. Okay.
Smaller, maybe not that they're smaller, but they're not like the big corporate. They're unique. They're special.
Uh-huh. Okay, so you put businesses that, we'll say businesses that, well, intentionally care. So that idea of commerce is also important to you in your neighborhood. What else? Athletics? Okay. Why is athletics important to you? Okay. Just exposure and health? Yeah, physical health. So things, infrastructure that contributes to your health, something like that.
For me, the main reason to move to this neighborhood 28 years ago was its diversity.
Diversity, yeah, that's a great one. That was also one of my big reasons. So put infrastructure. Well, just put health. Put health. And then and then diversity. What else? What's important about diversity to you? Like, how would you dive into that a little bit?
I'll take my mask off just for a moment. I can speak better that way. I'm originally from Germany. And my first experience of the US was New York, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. And then I met my husband who made me stay in this country and move to Texas. And I experienced racism, overt racism, for the first time when I came to Dallas. Not towards me, but towards others.
Mm-hmm.
And I specifically said, if I want to continue to live here, I have to be in a neighborhood where there are all kinds of people, because I specifically value the different ideas and concepts that people bring to the table that come from different backgrounds, different religions, and different experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And the only place where in 1994 I could find that, however rough it was at that time, was here in Oak Cliff, because the neighborhood was predominantly Hispanic. And I loved that ability to have neighbors that spoke different languages, ate different foods, had a different culture, going to the Fiesta Market where they still had mariachi bands playing music outside. And it made me feel like I was in a space that is alive and not homogenous, because I don't think homogenic environments breed any kind of innovation or empathy or anything like that.
Okay, so sort of I'm trying to get to the core. It's like almost because there's a lot of different reasons why we can value diversity. You're speaking to a sort of a variation of ideas and culture
Yes.
to sort of add to the
And
interest of life.
To understanding of other people because you are living in that very mixed environment where not one particular way of life is pervasive, but where they mesh up
Yeah,
and come together.
that's great. Thank you. Did you have a hand up? Yes.
Aren't we also agreed on the nature and the excuse? We find that very accessible in our behavior. So you can tell them that.
Okay.
But
What?
we also really appreciate the actual visibility of our neighborhood, of our neighbors themselves. The front porch culture of Oakland. And then now I'm surrounded by the brick Jackson's haciendas. So I have this backyard culture and just having eyes on people so much. Front porch, back porch, lots of walkers. That has created an amazing our neighborhood has. It's less accessible to suburbs.
So you're talking about, when you talk about the front porch, which the front porch was a really important idea to me when I moved to Oak Cliff, because I am reclusive by nature, and I recognize the problem with that, and I need a front porch so that I can meet my neighbors. And also, you're kind of referencing that same idea in terms of the nature and the athletics. It's almost like to be outside to run into people to some extent, is what it sounds like. Is that fair? Okay. So put, how would we say that? Almost like common or unintentional. Just put common human collision. How about that? I'm testing her skills today. Is there another? Yes.
Like architecture, nature, people.
Why is that important? I can ask it. I know you, so I can ask more directly.
Because it's real. Like, so the connections are more real, the businesses are more real. It's like kind of what they were talking about. You can actually know the business owner and ask them what their motivation is and
Okay.
understand where they can, like, you know it better.
Okay. So there's an authenticity to the relationships. Put authentic relationships. Is that fair? Okay. Are there some up here that resonate with y'all so far? You're like, yeah, that's that one. Because what we're going to do is kind of pick one of these. We're going to talk a little bit more, but after number 2, we're going to hone it down into something more specific. So if there's something that really resonates with some of y'all, I want to know.
Diversity part of
Diversity?
especially the way she described it, homogeneity, not breeding,
Yeah.
empathy, and innovation with great sentence.
Mm-hmm. Do you know how to spell homogeneity? Yeah. We spelled it the other day together, actually. Homogenized, anyway. Yeah, you could actually put non. That would be. That's what we're looking for here. Yeah, both in our dairy and our neighborhood. Okay. What sorts of experience, the second question, we're going to do this again, 2 minutes. What sorts of experiences with your neighbors have created value for you? So trying to think specifically about an actual experience, and what do you believe about what a neighbor should do? So one is thinking like very tangibly, practically, maybe about an experience that you had, and the other is just what do you believe a neighbor should do? If I have a good neighbor, my good neighbor does this. So not that he's kind, but what does he do or she do that is kind? Does that make sense? Okay. What sorts of experiences with your neighbors have created value for you? What do you believe about what a neighbor should do? What do you have?
One thing that we were talking about, it was kind of common to both of our neighborhoods, interdependence.
Okay, flesh that out a little more for me.
We were talking about in our home neighborhoods, like she said that they have like a tool pool, so that
Uh-huh.
everybody needs every
Oh,
two
that's
weeks.
cool.
They'll help each other out.
Mhm.
They have keys to each other's houses in case someone's dog needs to be let out or
Mhm.
a package needs to be put inside. Watching each other's kids, like just that kind of thing.
Okay. And how did you phrase that again?
Willing interdependence.
Willing interdependence. There you go. Willing interdependence. So she was saying that, if y'all couldn't hear that, in your neighborhood, they have a tool pool. They have a pool of a shed of tools that everyone has a key to, and they all sort of share tools, something like that. But
we don't believe in crazy consumption.
yes.
So we kind of know who has which tools, and when somebody is working on something, and we have a lot of DIYers around, it's like,
Uh-huh.
you have the tool, and then we loan each other.
Okay, okay.
So we don't all
Great.
buy the
Yeah.
same stuff and do all the same thing.
Okay. I was mixing up the keys to your house, putting those together. Okay. Yes. That's great. So they have a tool pool, they all borrow tools from each other, and they have a bit of a system for that. What else?
I have a quick funny story. Does anybody know or remember Tom Battles? So I have a friend
Yeah.
called Tyler. So we lived at Bobby's shop for a couple of years, and like it was either the first day of the day after we moved in. He came and knocked on our door, and he said to Stephanie, he said, "Who are you?" And it was kind of, but in a way that I was like, Oak Cliff is almost like an East Coast nosiness mixed with like a Southern friendliness kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of like, you're welcome here, but for now, this is my turf, you know? Like,
Uh-huh.
it was kind of like, that stood out to me as like, his own way of creating value, you could say.
Uh-huh. So there is a value. I mean, I remember an old neighbor of ours who, for the first 2 years I lived there, I was just annoyed by her constantly because she was so nosy. And then I began to slowly see the value of the nosiness and like, okay, I have really come to appreciate that. So how can we phrase that that's maybe something more significant than nosiness?
Watching out for each other.
Uh-huh. Involvement maybe, like an involvement, intentional involvement in the other people. Intentional involvement. What else? Yeah.
For someone like notorious template killer, my neighbor just kind of saw the devastation that I was going through in terms of just killing plants and flowers.
Uh-huh.
They were like, they gifted me plants and stuff, and they also just gave me tips on, hey, this is how you maintain it, this is how you keep it going. And single guy, I really appreciated that because as much as I YouTube the TikTok research, nothing was working, but just a little bit of love from the neighbor kind of.
Mhm. So some generosity with their time and their knowledge. Generosity with resources. What else?
About respect your neighbors and neighborhood by taking care of your home.
Taking care of your home. So valuing neighbors who keep up their house. Why is that important?
It's just cleanness.
Mhm.
I see the temperature here is very high.
Mhm.
And if people do not keep their places clean, fire can start up in your
Mhm.
backyard or
So kind of for safety and security.
safety,
Uh-huh.
and beauty, because if you plant trees, you will help clean the air,
Uh-huh.
change the climate somehow.
Okay.
The neighborhood and the air.
Yeah.
And I think to her point, and it's not just because we do architecture, but it's like, we take care of our image because we love ourselves, right? So we should take care of our home because we love our neighborhood too.
Yeah. And so we'll put maybe correct me if I'm barking up the wrong tree, but if we put something like aesthetics here, right? The look of the neighborhood is important to us, that it looks good, because it's where we spend time, right? I mean, you clean your house because you live in your house, and it's more enjoyable to live in your house when it's clean. So is that a fair, like, to say aesthetics? Okay. AE. That one's a tricky one. We're going to stump you. Yes?
Adults modeling neighborly activity for their children. So my son and his friend group next door, they just go over and knock on the door and start playing with each other there too. So I think encouraging that and modeling that, it just comes more naturally to them. So fostering that neighborliness for young children.
Okay. So there, I mean, there's an aspect of other children being there, which is important, and kind of relationships through children. I mean, are you saying that that's kind of like a starting point for other relationships? Is that, or am I?
It's both. So showing your children that this is how a neighborhood operates, but also learning from your children. They don't have that wall or shame or embarrassment to keep
Mhm.
from running next door and like wanting to play.
Mhm.
And I think we can learn both ways.
Okay. Yes, you did it. Nice. Let's put children relationships. Which, as a father of 4, I can appreciate how important that is. Okay. Anything else? So what I want to do now is, as a group, we're going to move to question 3. And the question is, we're going to look at 1 and 2, and we're going to, which we've already, it's hard for me to do this without jumping ahead, but start to draw out some of the values that we see that we are committed to based off of our answers in 1 and 2. So what can we look at in 1 and 2 and say, we are committed to this value? So when we're talking about clean houses, we're talking and aesthetics, right? We're talking about the value of almost like a daily enjoyment or a little bit of order maybe as well, because we don't like to live in chaos. The value of diversity, and so getting under that, like this idea that, like you said, when things are diverse, and that diversity goes well beyond just race, right? I mean, there's cultural, and that's a different thing, but there's so much going on to that, and when you get into that diversity, you start to get such a uniqueness of ideas and businesses that we get to really make a part of our culture and our everyday experience. So what, how am I going to whittle this down here? I think there's an overlap here that I want to hone in on. This sort of authentic relationships and human collisions. So when we think about this idea, we have a lot of intentionality, a lot of relationships. When we think about these things, when we think about authentic relationships and being able to go outside and exercise and walk through a beautiful neighborhood and run into our neighbors, what is it that we're saying that we value when we're talking about those things? What is the underlying value that we are pursuing when we're saying, hey, I want to live in a beautiful neighborhood where people walk outside?
And so I would think that connection is actually at the core of all of that.
Mm-hmm. Connection, that's great, yeah. Belonging to something.
Not at a superficial level, but
Uh-huh.
what really makes connection, which means there is an emotional component
Mhm.
to that. And I think that, for me, when I look at that, that seems to play into all of this.
Yeah. Yeah, okay. So it may be like a deep connection with the people that are well, that are in our lives because they're in our neighborhood. So right deep connection here with neighbors. Yeah, well, I mean, they go together, but they're kind of different. One is sort of being intentionally connected to people, and one is sort of being a part of something that's bigger than yourself. That's correct. And put belonging to something bigger. We'll go with these two because they are related, and we'll see if we can hone it in. Okay, we're going to go back to the format, 2 minutes, where you're talking with your neighbor, and we're going to look at the fourth question. So we're going to take number 3, deep connection with neighbors and belonging to something bigger. And we're going to say, we're going to use this, number 3 here now, for the next question, which is looking at our value here. Think about a time, this is a bit of a confessional, which I think is good for us all. Think about a time when you acted in a way that prevented this from being realized. Or what do you do sort of on a regular basis, or maybe regular's too strong of a word, but what do you do that prevents you from realizing this value of having deep connections with your neighbors and belonging to something bigger? Is that clear? What do you do that prevents that? If you can think of a specific instance, I think that's really helpful. We can draw into that. Or if you think of like, hey, I do this on a regular basis, that's helpful as well. Like I said, I'm a reclusive person, so I like to hide from neighbors by nature. So that's why the front porch thing was important to me. If you have a 10 o'clock appointment and you need to leave, you can do that. I won't be offended. Let's try to answer question 4 now together. So what are some things? Who wants to go first? What are some things that you've done that have prevented you from having a deeper connection with your neighbors, or some habits that you have that prevent this?
Yeah, so we both discovered that we are actually not always consuming locally when we're consuming.
Okay.
So the convenience of that Amazon is only a click away definitely sometimes prevents us from doing more in this neighborhood, exploring if we could potentially solve that by, purchasing local if we have the need for something.
So the idea of convenience,
Yes.
right, is at so Alice, we write down convenience, specifically in shopping and keeping you from going to neighborhood stores. It's good. What else?
I just said being bought into that hurried life that you're describing, your old self, right?
Okay, what does that look like for you?
Not having time for a neighborly conversation.
What are you doing with the time otherwise?
Yeah.
I'm picking on you a little bit, Ryan.
That's right.
Yeah.
Spinning my wheels. Using kids as an excuse or business as an excuse.
Okay. Use it. No, I think you went too far. Actually, I can't think of how to spell it right now. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Using busyness as an excuse. Yeah, it's can't spell on the spot, I guess. What else? Yes.
Safety. I live in a 1940s printing factory that I bought
nobody knows what it is. When I bought it at first, I had a lot of problems with break-ins and people, giving me a hard time. So I just decided not to work on the front, and I work on the back, and nobody knows I live there, and nobody knows what it is. So it's
What did you say you bought? What kind of factory?
a 1940s printing factory.
Okay. You're on Clarendon? I know your property, yeah. Okay. Safety. Yeah, that's man, that's been a big one, right? E. Okay, anything else? And safety being like not getting out and meeting your neighbors because you're concerned with safety and don't want to.
Well, I've learned to go
Get
out
out.
and I meet my neighbors, but I've never been really open about letting anybody.
Oh, okay, okay, okay.
But I'm getting better.
That's good. Anything else? Hiding and gossiping. Wow. Yeah. You should go to church when you leave. Yeah. So why are you hiding? I know it's you, so. You have kind of a fear of relationships, maybe? I'm not your psychologist, so I'm not going to say. Like a fear of relationships, a fear of deeper connection? Okay. Hoarding time and gossiping. That's great. What? Huh? Yeah. Yeah. It's funny, we've done this a few times, and it's astounding how similar, like the same things come up, Okay, anything else? Yes.
Not always participating in the political process that is connected to the neighborhood.
Okay.
Okay, do I want to go to yet another hearing? Do I want to go?
Why would you not participate?
Because it sometimes becomes too much and too overwhelming.
Okay.
Or you have the feeling that your participation actually is not going to change anything because decisions have already been made and it's pro forma.
Okay, so,
Giving up factor in that is the part that I would see as something that prevents us from actually getting the value out of our neighborhood.
would you say kind of like a hoarding time on that, or?
It's not as much the time as the feeling that participation doesn't always yield results.
Okay, so almost like a hoarding of emotional resources. Okay, I understand that. Anything else? Okay. So, when we're looking at these things, you can put emotional resources under this. No. Okay. So when we look at going from 4 to 5 now, if we look at number 4, what can we imply? So this idea, right, of do not simply consume, create, was this idea that I mentioned of like two competing values, right? That there was something about me that was, it was external from the world, but it was also internal that I wanted to consume. But I knew that if I wanted to be who I thought I should be, that creating was really where I should focus my value and my attention. So we're looking to create kind of a competing value here. So when you look at convenience and busyness and safety and hoarding time, gossiping, emotional resources, what's our competing value here? What are we saying by these actions that maybe we also value along with our sort of bigger stated value. Does that make sense? Like, what are we committed to when we're saying these things are really important enough that they prevent us from doing what we know we should be doing? Security and convenience. Why is convenience important?
Lazy. We don't want to expend too much energy.
Uh-huh.
We don't know how much energy like other people can give us.
Mm-hmm.
The word hoard is a good word.
Okay. So yeah, we're kind of at that hoarding time and resources idea.
Personal health and safety is kind of
Okay.
the value for personal health and safety.
Self-preservation, maybe?
Preservation, yeah, there you go.
Okay. Yeah, right. Self-preservation. And maybe that's related to the hoarding aspect.
I thought self-preservation also, and then he said laziness. I'll flip it, since it's supposed to be a conflicting value. I think we value efficiency, and community is not always in line with efficiency. Like, that takes time, because I do value efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that means like, oh my gosh, there's the talkative neighbor, am I going to run, or I need to wait until he goes back in his house?
Yeah, my wife said something like that. Yeah, which is that is sort of a time hoarding for that efficiency.
Yeah.
Independence and originality.
Tell me more.
The more you engage in the public spaces, become interconnected, you might lose the ability to make individual choices, original, creative ideas, because you're too concerned with the enmeshment of ideas.
Okay. So you're talking about sort of almost like losing your own individuality or your ability to be an individual when you get into the group, right? That there's some friction that happens there. And since I know you, Matt, I'm gonna drill into this a little more. So what is it? Tell me more about what you think you would lose in that. When you talk about the freedom to choose,
You lose your voice, you lose your opinion.
autonomy. I think one of the things that I've really experienced on my journey, and this tension with freedom, because I am a highly autonomous person. I don't like anybody to tell me what to do in my life. Is this idea, and this is kind of what I think was the Mr. Rogers idea for me, is it's what I often fear, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so I'm going to say this for me. What I often fear in that situation when my individuality is running up against the group is the responsibility that I might feel I have to take if I voice my opinion in this group, right? It's like when my kids experience this on a very simplistic level, it's like they're, voice their opinion about something they don't like that's happening in the group, and I immediately turn to them. I'm saying, okay, what's your responsibility in that, and how are you going to take that? And so when we become this, when we bring our individuality to a group, there's a responsibility that comes with it, where if I keep my individuality over here and I'm just autonomous and do this thing, then I don't really have a responsibility to other people. And that is a huge, I think for me, there's an enormous fear of the energy that would take if I started taking on that responsibility. And when you take on responsibility now, there's the potential to be successful or to fail. So I kind of took that really deep, but would you, how do we say that? Did I speak to something that is true for you. I don't want to put words in your mouth. Okay. So if we could say something like a fear of what our responsibility may bring. I don't know if that's a good way. Yeah, fear of responsibility. Just put that. Okay. What else? Yes. I went over time. Thank you for being patient with me.